When you think of G.I. Joe, what usually pops into your head is either the super patriotic 80s show that was made to sell toys, or the super gritty movie series that was basically made to sell toys to the children of the original fans. You know, a similar story to another product that this company made. However, unlike that other property, there really doesn't seem to be that much of an audience for everything else in the franchise. Outside of the OG show and the movies, that's it. You don't really see any fan bases of all the other properties of this franchise. And for a while, this show was no exception. Essentially just being used for a commercial for the movies, so much so that when they had to choose movies or show, the show was gone. But seemingly ever since its cancellation, the show steadily got a bit more of a fan base. And rightfully so, as this show is really good. Not just because of the action, writing, characters, but also because, much like the 80s show, it does serve as a little bit of a time capsule of the politics of the time. And it's not just the generic, oh, America good, America great, blah 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 kind of stuff that the 80s show did. No, this actually goes a bit more in depth. Now, since this show is good, and I know it wasn't the big success that it was supposed to be, I am actually going to put a spoiler warning here. Now, you see, technically, I'm not really going to spoil, like, the storyline of the show, as technically not the entirety of the show is political. Some of it is still, like, your action sci-fi adventure, and I'm really just going over the political themes of the show. I mean, that is the title of the web series, but I do think it would do you better if you went into the show blind. If you're still here, let me give you a little bit of a background before we get into the show itself. In 2009, Hasbro, the toy company, bought the Discovery Kids channel in order to create a new children's block on TV that would basically become a new figure against Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and whatever the heck Disney had at the time. For me, it was Jetix turned Disney XD. The Discovery Kids channel was sort of like a semi-educational network. You know, for kids. It wasn't like 100% educational, but it was semi-educational. And while the newly rebranded Hub Network continued those programs, they also decided to add some non-educational programs. And since they already had a ton of intellectual property under their belts, it was pretty easy. They already have a bunch of toy line / shows that are already in the place of the Americans' hearts. Just reboot them for a new generation. And since the era of animation was already starting to change, the people who were being brought on to write the shows would basically be given a lot of free reign as long as they stuck within the core brand and were able to keep the prime audience interested. They didn't really see an issue. And the people who were tasked to do these reboots really did try to make things different. Instead of just being a toy commercial for whatever product that they were supposed to push out, they would actually tell compelling stories. One of them apparently told enough good stories that they were able to get a bunch of people who were nowhere close to their target demographic to become a new subsection in the fandom. And of course, G.I. Joe Renegades was no exception. Deciding to sort of subvert your expectations for the Joes, you see, rather than being an elite squadron of completely obedient soldiers that are super pro-patriot and all that jazz, this group of Joes were on the run from the US government for the entirety of the show. Despite being good little boys that did their job, they become fugitives, and the government that they loved so much completely turns their back on them. And all of this stems from them trying to stop Cobra. Speaking of, this is where we get another one of the big differences. You see, since the 80s was in the height of the Cold War, what's Cobra? Cobra is an anti-American group trying to take over the United States. Meanwhile, Cobra in this series is a little different. Rather than being an opposing military or terrorist faction, instead, meet Cobra Industries, a multinational corporation that has its hands on essentially everything from arms manufacturing to pharmaceuticals to even a line of supermarkets. They essentially have a monopoly on the world. And of course, they've done a lot of shady stuff to get to this point. Take episode 10, Cobra builds a dam in a small town. The reason being is that they struck a deal with the mayor saying after it's built, they will have a massive amount of tourism and free electricity for everybody in the town. However, since the dam has been built, the town has essentially become dead, as the river that they needed to survive has been cut off. And turns out, Cobra is not even fulfilling their end of the deal, as all the electricity that is being generated from the dam is being funneled back to Cobra. And Cobra is not the only evil corporation in the series. Episode 3, we're introduced to another corporation called Mars Industries, basically the arms-dealing subsidiary to Cobra, who in their introductory episode kidnaps veterans off the streets to use for their experiments because they, quote, cost nothing and are easily disposed of. Man, try putting that in the new US Army ads. Heck, there's even an interesting episode of the series where Cobra actually decides to create a virus, and they're attempting to sell the vaccine of said virus to make a big profit. Okay, moving on. This sort of anti-corporate messaging remains pretty prevalent within the show, especially early on, in the second episode, when Cobra is evacuating a small town because an experiment that they were running went wrong. A farmer shoots paintballs at them and yells, "corporate scum." This could be very stereotypical of me, but you don't necessarily hear farmers yell corporate scum that much. I feel that he's sort of a representation of like a libertarian Tea Party type, as at the time of the show's production, they were on the rise. A similar thing could be said about their interpretation of a prominent G.I. Joe character, Breaker. Rather than being the Joe's communications officer, he is a former worker of Cobra who turned against them and began an anti-Cobra blog that is vital for leaking information about Cobra. Breaker, I think, is sort of like a reference to a lot of things. You see, the blog itself can be sort of like an interpretation of like a Tea Party right-wing conservative forum board or like something like InfoWars. But wait, Breaker is not shown to be like incredibly crazy or a conspiratorial type, so maybe the site itself is sort of like a reference to WikiLeaks. And Breaker's backstory in specific sort of makes me think Chelsea Manning, works for something and is like really proud to work for something, but then leaks very vital information about them. Basically serving as a merging of the two. There's sort of more I could technically go into, like one episode having corrupt cops, one episode having a religious cult, one episode having a communist revolutionary, one episode dealing with juvenile gang violence, but I think I pretty much got all of the main stuff important to the show. So if you watched it and you're actually kind of interested now, feel free to watch the show. I really do think it's worth it. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if there's more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, check out my articles on the Independent Political Report, or consider supporting me on Patreon.